Hey everyone, Harris O'Malley from DrNerdLove.com, brought to you by my generous patrons at patreon.com/DrNerdLove. If you dig the series, consider supporting it by becoming a patron yourself. This week, I want to do things a little differently and talk for a minute about some recent developments in my own life. So, a little more than a month back, I was diagnosed with ADHD. Which, well, frankly, getting that diagnosis explained a lot about my life. In fact, I'm kind of pissed that I didn't get this much earlier. Turns out that I'd been inadvertently playing life on a harder difficulty than I'd realized, and until very recently, I couldn't quite understand why everybody else seemed to be having a much easier time than I was. Now, I had been diagnosed with chronic depression back in college, and God knows a toxic relationship exacerbated that. But there'd also been a lot of other issues that I've been dealing with, issues involving executive dysfunction, disorganization, a basic inability to remember important that I had to do, and of course, a hell of a lot of social anxiety. And I honestly thought that my problem was that I needed to be more disciplined, more determined, just able to bull through the hard parts. In fact, a big part of why I went into pickup in the first place was because I wanted to find ways to overcome my anxiety when it came to trying to meet women. I was, for all intents and purposes, brute forcing my way through things because, frankly, I just thought that was what I needed to do. Now that I've received this diagnosis, a whole lot of things have become a lot clearer to me, especially because of how many other conditions are comorbid with ADHD. Depression is a big part of it. As it turns out, ADHD can seriously exacerbate depression. But one of the other things that I learned is how much ADHD can cause social anxiety. You're constantly trying to evaluate what people are thinking, how they feel about you. It's like your brain is in a constant state of red alert. In fact, one of the more common comorbid conditions is what's known as rejection sensitivity and rejection sensitive dysphoria. These conditions, which are defined as the tendency to anxiously expect, anticipate, perceive, and intensely react to rejection, as well as the extreme pain or fear caused by rejection or criticism, are incredibly common in folks who have ADHD, as well as in people who have borderline personality disorder or social anxiety. Now, for those of us with ADHD, this seems to come part and parcel with the way that our brains have issues with emotional dysregulation. To be perfectly clear, right now, RSD, and for anyone who's been in the pickup scene, that is a hell of an ironic acronym, is still very new, and it is in the early days of being researched. However, rejection sensitivity is very real and very well studied. It's not just a case of being too soft, but an actual measurable difference in how some brains react to the stimulus of rejection, or more often, the fear of rejection. Rejection sensitivity and RSD helps us understand why rejection hurts so much, whether you have rejection sensitivity or sensitive dysphoria or not. In fact, knowing this now explains so much of what I had been dealing with for my entire life, not to mention how incredibly fucking hard it was, and in some cases still is, to wrestle through what were ultimately a lot of very complicated emotions, even when I knew logically that things were okay. A lot of the way that I learned to deal with anxiety and rejection was basically through the emotional equivalent of blunt force trauma and a few coping mechanisms that were, let's be honest, less than helpful in the long term. Over time, I developed a lot of systems to manage things that actually do help, and I learned how to make them work much more efficiently, but it was incredibly difficult. In fact, the hardest thing is dealing with the fear of rejection, almost as much, if not more so, than rejection itself. One of the worst tricks that nature has played on us as a species is that we evolved for survival, not happiness. Nature couldn't give less of a if we're happy or if we're always on the verge of pissing ourselves in terror, as long as we survive and spread our genes to our progeny. This is one of the reasons why we have what's known as the negativity bias. The negativity bias is the way our brains respond more readily and more intensely to negative stimuli, and the way that we continue to dwell on negative events or memories. Negative emotions, negative events affect us 5 times more powerfully than positive ones. This is actually a great advantage when you're living on the savannah or in forests. You're much more aware of things like the possibility of saber-toothed tigers lurking in the grass, or which plants and berries are going to kill you if you eat them. Problem is, we don't really live like that anymore. We don't need our spidey sense to be that sensitive or that powerful. It still is, because nature selects for alive and not happy. Now, if you take all of that and combine it with the fact that as social animals, rejection used to be a very real mortal danger, a threat to our individual continued survival, and you've got a recipe for a condition that's just gonna bake your noodle. Nature went and f***ed up a perfectly good ape and gave it anxiety.
I understood that reference.
Because our brains treat rejection as danger, we tend to be hyper aware of it. In fact, one of the hardest things for me to learn, especially back in the day when I was just starting out in pickup, was learning how to recognize that fear was just fear, not reality. If I suspected that rejection was coming, and to be real with y'all, this is something I still occasionally have issues with, I could get preoccupied for days or weeks looking for clues that I was about to get rejected or be dumped. Notice very carefully that I said suspected. Part of the problem was that I was getting charged up by that fear, and my brain was going on a defensive cascade trying to find the threat that I thought was coming. When you're afraid of rejection, or if you're afraid that rejection is imminent, you end up not thinking clearly. Your brain has gone on red alert, and now you're dealing with a lot of cognitive distortions because, hey, something is wrong and you need to deal with it now. So there's that emotional reasoning that says, well, I feel like I'm getting rejected, or I'm about to get rejected, so clearly I am being rejected. We personalize everything, and we think that it has everything to do with us, instead of being something as simple and mundane and not threatening as conflicting plans or even basic incompatibility. This is all important to understand because the way that we respond to rejection can affect us down the line in our lives. Rejection that we've experienced in the past can actually affect us now. This can sound a little bit woo-woo, but our bodies store emotions as energy. Stress and fear cause us to produce adrenaline and also cause our brains to produce cortisol, the stress hormone. And cortisol can build up in your system. Because we have this negativity bias, which means that our negative memories are that much stronger, we're much more likely to dwell on them. We are capable of replaying and reliving our past traumas, feeling them all over again like that they are real and that they're happening to us now. So basically, we're hurting our own feelings. But because we do this, we create more stress, which causes more stress responses, and these not only end up building more cortisol in your system, but build neural pathways that encourage us to keep ruminating on these past rejections and keep feeling the discomfort and pain that comes from rejection and the fear of rejection. And all of that can end up becoming a dominant thought pattern. After all, how we think and feel shapes our personality. When you spend a lot of time dwelling on rejection, you can actually end up making a personality out of being rejected. In a very real way, it's kind of like an addiction, a pattern our bodies or brains have adopted that's outlasted its usefulness. When that happens, it becomes a way that we functionally give up our free will because life becomes a series of steps that you take to try to avoid feeling the discomfort and pain of being rejected. And when you felt a lot of the pain that comes from rejection, or you suffer from rejection sensitivity or rejection sensitive dysphoria, then you are especially prone to doing damn near anything in order to avoid it again. You may develop the fawn response to trauma and become a people pleaser, or become focused on the idea that if you're just valuable enough to people, you won't get rejected. Or you may go the other way. You may become incredibly risk averse and avoid anything that might lead to having to face even the possibility of rejection. Can't get rejected if you never actually do anything in the first place. Surprise Mr. Senior Kitty cameo. Say hi, guy. Sometimes it causes you to deal with Pre-rejection, rejecting yourself before someone else could, even though they weren't actually going to reject you. Or you anticipate the rejection and so you respond to it as though you were being rejected, even though you weren't. But your behavior ends up pushing people away. Regardless of how we respond to that fear, we end up missing out on the things we want, which then just makes you fall even further into despair. Of course, one of the problems that comes right along with this is that we get angry at ourselves for feeling this way. We get pissed because we feel like we're being weak or cowardly, just plain old chicken. And this makes things worse because, straight talk, gentlemen, you can't shame yourself into improvement no matter what people tell you. Anger and self-hate isn't fuel or motivation, it's just hate. It may make you do something to try to feel better, but hate can't sustain progress, nor can it get you through the inevitable stumbling blocks that you will encounter. You'll hit some setback or fall back into old patterns, which happens to everyone, and then you will just hate yourself even more. That causes the pattern to repeat itself until you give up and end up stewing in your own bitterness and resentment. Your desire to improve and to become who you want to be needs to be stronger than your self-hate, than your sadness, or your pain if you want to move forward. But like I said, I've wrestled with this my entire life, and between what I've learned about rejection sensitivity and the way that I've learned to manage these feelings, I can tell you this: to help deal with your fear of rejection, you need to break the cycle. And to do that, you need two things: mindfulness and self-management. You start by setting yourself up for success, managing your mood, putting yourself in the best possible position to overcome fear and the negativity bias. So you want to, say, start your day with the things that make you feel good, the things that put you in a better mood, instead of, I don't know, doom scrolling through social media or hitting up subreddits or forums or Twitter accounts that are full of people who are bitter and angry. Find the activities that make you feel confident and strong and work at making those into daily habits. Part of what can help with this is to keep track of your emotions and your mood. Using an app like Mood Meter to track your feelings and your emotions and how you feel through the day is a great way to find the things that trigger negative emotions in you, as well as the activities or experiences that create those amazing positive feelings. The more information that you have about what's influencing your mood, the more that you can backwards engineer your day to maximize the things that make you feel great. Similarly, you need to be aware of what you're feeding your mind. Garbage going in means garbage is going to come out. This does not mean that you need to be on a cycle of constant self-improvement or only reading good books or studying serious topics. What it actually means is that you need to feed yourself the things that are representative of what you want in your life. And that includes kindness and self-compassion. Amongst other things, this means changing the way that you talk about yourself, talking yourself down, and self-insults, even when these are just self-deprecating jokey jokes, are just ways of reinforcing the idea that you're awful. You're making yourself the butt of your own jokes. Functionally, you're bullying yourself. If you're someone who is always sharing memes or jokey posts about how awful you or people who just happen to represent you are, talking about how horrible you are at dates or relationships or how much you suck, even when it's supposed to be humorous, then you're just reinforcing the belief that you are awful and deserve to be rejected. The same goes when you're hanging around people who tell you that things are hopeless and that there's nothing you can do to get better, or who want you to turn that anger outward and blame others. It's garbage that just reinforces your worst beliefs about yourself. And I get it, it seems harmless. You're just venting your frustrations. Where's the harm in that? But what fires together, wires together. You're creating those same neural pathways as you are when you're constantly reliving past rejections. That's why if you want to overcome your fear of rejection, you have to feed your mind the things that encourage you to do better, the things that inspire you to be better and remind you that you have this incredible, amazing potential if you would just use it. But being aware of your moods and emotions isn't just important for creating positive habits or building your confidence. You want to be aware of how you feel, because many times what you're feeling isn't actually rejection. It's what you think is rejection. You are anticipating being rejected, and so you are responding to it as though it were already happening. For a personal example, when I thought someone that I was seeing was slow walking me out of the relationship, I began to respond as though I were already being dumped. That mix of tension and anger and fear bled through when we were spending time together, and it created this wedge between us, which is what ultimately caused the breakup that I'd been afraid of, even though it was never actually on the horizon in the first place. When your anxiety is up or your negative emotions are high, it is so much harder to think clearly. This is why it is very important to be mindful of your feelings, to recognize when your emotions are becoming more and more intense. So be mindful of your body. Do a mental scan of how your body feels. Are your muscles tense? Are your shoulders tight? Are you clenching your jaw? Are you pulling your shoulders up? Is your heart rate going up? Especially if it's going up much higher than it should be under the circumstances. The more intense your feelings are, the more that you need to shift your focus to slowing things down, to calming yourself, to soothing yourself before engaging. The more upset you are, the more afraid you are, the more that you're going to want to do something. But that means that you're also much more likely to lash out instead of responding in a way that's actually reasonable or productive. Calming yourself, taking a moment to breathe, disengage, lets you engage with the issues much, much more clearly and helps you look at things without the filter of incoming rejection that sets your systems onto red alert. You're in a better position to ask yourself, are they rejecting you? Or are they just busy? Is there another explanation? Think to yourself, how many times have you, say, not responded to something right away because you were busy or didn't have time to get to your phone, or simply just didn't have the energy to respond or engage with anyone right then? For that matter, you need to ask yourself, what are some other possible explanations for what's going on? Explanations that aren't they hate you or that they're getting ready to kick you out or reject you. Don't forget, your first thoughts are often wrong, especially when you're seeing it through the filter of anticipation and fear. They only become correct because we reacted to them as though we were being rejected and thus causing our rejection. It's also important to learn how to detach and release from outcomes. Now, I get that this seems a little bit strange. After all, how can you detach yourself from the outcome when the outcome is what you want? But part of what can drive a fear of rejected is what being rejected or not being rejected may actually mean for you. One of the weirder issues is that a fear of success can actually trigger a fear of rejection. People will often use a fear of rejection to avoid trying. Being afraid of rejection, for example, means not having that awkward conversation about the relationship, because if you don't have that conversation, hey, you don't have to make that relationship work or deal with the possible complications that may come from it. Or you may be afraid of actually getting what you want because there's a part of you that knows that what you want isn't actually going to change things for you. It's just surface validation. Incels who get plastic surgery, for example, are a classic example of this. They discover that nothing has actually changed for them because the problem wasn't their looks. And deep down, they know it. Improvement and validation had to come from within, not from without. It's also important to take time to appreciate and improve your own sense of self-worth. You need to help yourself undo that past trauma that you've experienced and to break the cycle of constantly reliving it. Meditation, especially mindfulness meditation, is a great way to learn how to break out of those obsessive thought patterns and negative loops. When you practice meditation, you learn how to recognize when you're having those thoughts, and importantly, how to pop out of them, shifting your focus back to something positive and affirming. Learning how to be bigger than your thoughts is an incredibly powerful way of getting those thoughts and feelings under control. While you're at it, you want to do some self-validation exercises. Now, I know this sounds just like reading affirmations in the mirror, which actually does help when you take it seriously. But it's much more than that. It means being your own support system and cheering squad, treating yourself with kindness, and acknowledging your strengths, your successes, and the effort that you're making. As part of the self-validation exercise, you may want to look into some outside sources. For example, you may want to get some cognitive behavioral therapy workbooks, or try a self-directed program like Mood Gym to help you be more mindful and aware of not just your feelings and fears, but how they affect your perception. And yeah, sometimes that rejection is actually real, not just something you're afraid of. But you can deal with that too. You can work on yourself, develop your social skills to become a more charismatic and warmer, more approachable person, and so not have to be afraid of being rejected as often. In fact, I have a playlist of episodes specifically for working on those skills. Hit the thingy or check the links in the show notes. Now, it is important to note that the point of all of this isn't to become perfectly fearless or to never worry about being rejected. It's to break the cycle that causes you to constantly be on edge and afraid. As a good friend of mine says, with peace comes bandwidth. Learning how to break the cycle of fear and anticipation is like closing the apps that have been running in the background and sucking up all of your RAM. By doing so, you are freeing up your mind, your emotions, and your time. When you break the cycle, when you close those apps running in the background that have just been making you miserable, you may be surprised to discover just how much of your mind they have taken up and how much of your power you've just called back to yourself. When you do that, you're going to be left with just one question. Now that you're no longer so afraid, now that you're no longer shaping your life to avoid even the possibility of rejection, what are you gonna do with all of this amazing newfound potential? So that is going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much for being part of it. So you've heard from me, and now I want to hear from you. Let's talk fear, anxiety, and mental health. Have you dealt with ADHD? How have you learned to overcome anxiety? Share your story in the comments below. I know I can't wait to read them. Meanwhile, if you are ready to build those social skills and develop your life so that you are ready to find your perfect partner, then you need to check out my book, New Game Plus, The Geek's Guide to Love, Sex, and Dating. This is the instruction manual you have always wanted, the A to Z guide for learning how to take a level in sexy badass and find the relationship you've always wanted, whether it is for a lifetime or just that night. Links to buy it are in the show notes, so go check it out. And if you do check it out, or any of my other books for that matter, do me a huge favor. Be sure to rate and review it on Amazon and Goodreads. It's a huge, huge help. If you've got dating advice questions you want an answer to, send them in to doc@drnerdlove.com. If you're digging the series, then you know what to do. Hit that thumbs up, like, share, subscribe to get more, ring the bell. Do me a huge, huge favor. Be sure to share this on Twitter and Facebook. Send it around to all your friends, especially folks you think are struggling with rejection. But if you are really enjoying these videos, if you feel like you're getting a lot out of it, you're finding that it really helps, and you want to support the channel and in the process help fund some amazing new projects, consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/drnerdlove. Even $1 is a huge help. It helps cover hosting and equipment cost, and it's like I always say, I could not do this without the generous help of all of my patrons, so thank you all so very much. I appreciate each and every one of you. Meanwhile, follow me on Twitter at @DrNerdLove. Join the private Facebook group NerdLove Academy at facebook.com/groups/DrNerdLove. And as always, hit that logo to subscribe, check out my other videos, and I will see you here next time with more about love, sex, and dating. Thanks for watching.